All right, let's kick this thing off. We've got the same local climate organization panel plus 3 new members. 2. Well, all right. So we got John Wilder of Las Vegas Climbers Liaison Council, and then I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself.
My name is Roger Brown. I do bolt replacement in Yosemite.
My name is Dave Pegg. I do bolt replacement for the Rifle Climbers Coalition, and I place a lot of bolts for myself.
So we talked about organizational issues, how to fund, operate, rebolting organizations. Now we're going to go whole hog into hardware and techniques, and since I know we're all experts in that, but what we want to kind of emphasize here is that each of y'all are from a different part of the country, different climate, different rock type, so there's some different practices you're doing with the hardware, and so we want to hear what you're putting in, what type of rock, why you're using that hardware there, what are those factors. Ready, John?
Oh man, all right. Okay, so here in the desert we're not, obviously we just talked about the corrosion issues, and we're just not that concerned about it here. We do use stainless primarily on stuff that is less than maybe vertical, but we do use carbon. And a lot of the reason we use carbon steel is because they're 3.5 inch, so we get a little bit more length and strength out of them. But stainless, what's our 1/2 inch stainless?
1/2 inch or 1/2 inch, but 3
3 3/4.
Yeah.
You stainless?
No, carbon.
Right. What's the stainless?
The stainless, the standard power bolts people tend to use are in 1/2 inch stainless. They only come in 2.75 and 4.75. So that's the medium length that people like to use for root development. They don't make in stainless.
And John, we're all talking red rock sandstone?
This is all red rock. We don't, primarily have not ventured into limestone. All that's new and maintained by a different kind of set of people. But yeah, so the 2 3/4 inch stainless is good for us, but there are, when there's rock quality issues, steep overhangs, where we're not concerned about liquid, but we want to make sure we get a little bit more strength, we'll put in a 3.5 inch carbon steel, for sure. And this past couple years ago, Greg Barnes was kind enough to send me the 5/8 by, what are they, 4s? Yeah, by 4-inch monsters for the trophy, which has the softest rock I've ever experienced. We pulled the torque on those to 75 foot-pounds, which is actually 25 foot-pounds short of what they recommend. They are giant bolts, and that rock, I drilled 27 holes in that rock on 1/3 of a battery. They're 5/8 inch diameter. Yeah.
So you're using hand drill.
So the power drill, we have a power drill refining line. We have Wilderness here, so Wilderness is always hand drill replacement. And when we hand drill, we use 3/8 inch, and when we power drill in the canyon or in Calico Basin, we use 1/2 inch, which is what's required by the ESCA. That's their.
Well, we also use 1/2 inch.
If it's soft enough.
Any other questions? Yeah, we'll do kind of removal, patching, that kind of stuff in another round, but let's just kind of do what you covered down the line.
Yeah. Well, I've done mostly replacement in Yosemite, Red Rocks, Joshua Tree, Owens River Gorge, a little bit Indian Creek. Generally desert areas, except for Yosemite. And in Yosemite, we've got just this giant backlog of 1/4 inch bolts, and so we don't even mess around with the 20-year-old 3/8 inch all rusty. We will have to do that sooner or later, but there's so many old 1/4 inch bolts, and they're just obviously need to be replaced because they are weak, and they look weak, and they break easily. But people should also know that people still use 1/4 inchers on lead. I've done it. I do it this summer. I did a bunch of routes. We're using 1/4 inch and 3/8 on lead, and there's quite a few people who do that. So because you're hand drilling, dicey stances, And the difference these days is people go back and pull out the quarter inchers, usually right away, and upgrade to 3/8, because it's much easier to do that on Pell once you're done with the root. But there's still, people do use quarter inchers today. So as far as bolts and rock type, it's mostly limited by wilderness. We're hand drilling wilderness. You can't be drilling the bolts you want because you're just going to kill yourself. Because you really want half-inch bolts. You don't want 3/8 because 3/8 stainless bolts will loosen up, especially in applications like hauling, haul points, and places where people whip, key pro bolts on steep stuff. 3/8 inch bolts stretch and loosen up, and it's pretty obvious. We replace bolts on El Cap, and a couple seasons later they're looking a little loose, and it's the actual bolt stretching. So they're insufficient for the purpose, but without a power drill permit, nobody's going to be have hand drilling half inchers. Other than Roger would do it if I really begged him, but nobody else will hand drill the half inchers. And for other places like Red Rocks, the rock quality is super variable. Like Black Magic out here, the bolts right off the ground, hand drill those. Short 3/8 takes almost as long as Yosemite. Up high on the same route, like 300 feet higher in the wall, it's just sugar. Like you can hand drill half-inch long bolts in no time at all. So ideally be using glue-ins for that, but not set up for it. It's a real pain to try to deal with the whole glue-in setup when you're not allowed to use power drills and you're on a multi-pitch. So you end up using larger mechanical bolts. Eventually they'll need to be glue-in bolts because no matter what mechanical bolt you use, it's going to loosen up as the rock breaks out from behind the hanger. So anyway, that's kind of the extremes, and then there's a whole bunch of different climbing areas and so on, and we've got more of them.
Okay, in the Black Hills we have granite. Most people are familiar with it. It's pegmatite granite, so it's got larger crystals in it. It's kind of interesting to climb on. Back when the coalition first started doing route repair, it was basically whatever the people that were doing repair had on hand or whatever we could get for cheap. About 6-7 years ago, we realized that wasn't a sustainable process, so we took a step back and slowed down our repair work and then tried to come up with a new policy, how we went about doing the repair work, and then actually what hardware we were going to use and standardize that. Moving forward, everything was going to be like this. The criteria we're looking at that we went through, maybe you move the pop can out of the way. There we go. So our criteria for standardizing our hardware was we really wanted to minimize the number of new holes that we had to drill in the rock, and ideally we could come back later, pop those bolts out, and then reuse the hole. Because forecasting down the line, we're thinking that at Mount Rushmore or different places like that, it could be a possibility that you can't drill any new holes. So, looking ahead, we want to be able to use bolts that were good now, they met our standards, but we could take them out easily and then reuse the holes down the line. So that was the first thing that we wanted to do. And then same thing, utilize CE certified stainless steel hardware with appropriate strength ratings. But at the same time, we wanted to minimize visual impact, so have a low hanger footprint, things like that. Want to keep the number of hardware components minimal, but also making sure that while doing that, we could use different configurations based on, what was going to happen out on the rock. If we needed to set it up with 2 chains hanging down, or if you want to do more of a vertical alignment, things like that. We used powder coating. We wanted to use the same type of hardware so we could, a lot like the ASCA is doing, or we wanted to brand our work so when people would come across it, they know this is a coalition bolt, these guys replaced it, to kind of help fund our cause in a way. So using powder coating and using a standardized list of components helped out with that. And then the last thing, we just wanted to simplify the worn component replacement. So on the end of our chains and things like that, where the rope will run through, we just use quick links on the end rather than like the steel wrap rings and such. So if it does get worn down, it's real easy just to unscrew them and take them out. Because what we're seeing right now, we have a number of routes, and I won't point people out like Ron, that back in the day, they replaced the anchors on high traffic routes that had the drop-in hangers that were really nice and convenient. Just go up, clip into it. But now they're getting to the point where they're highly worn out and we need to replace them. But the problem is it's not easy to do. You got to go up and cut them off and things like that. So we wanted to minimize the amount of effort it took to replace more parts. So with all that in mind, what we came up using, and then you want to just hit the thing. These are the anchor setups that we use. We use 12mm triflex bolts, 10mm pencil core hangers. We use the 10mm fixed top hanger for our bottom anchor bolt, and then We use 8mm oval screw links. We get them from Mallion Rapide, if I said that right. And then 8mm chain from Fix. So all of that stainless. It's all powder coated, so hopefully the durability of the powder coating lasts a bit longer than just spray paint would. And also it just kind of helps to protect it, so when people come across it, they know that it's coalition work. And that's essentially what we're using. It's been, working well for us now. There's a, I guess, a learning curve with how to work with the equipment, because it's good, but we're having problems if you didn't install it exactly, perpendicular to the rock, or if you didn't have an exactly perpendicular spot, the bolt would sit a little bit different. So it took us a while to figure out, how do we go about addressing this? Because it's easier said than done. You just have to drill it perpendicular into a flat spot. It doesn't always work out that way. So it took us some time to figure that stuff out. But we've come up with a system we think works good for the type of rock that we have and what we would like to see, I guess, happen down the line beyond our climbing careers or our time out on the rocks. So,
Could I ask a question?
sure.
Why don't you use a chain for the second one there? Why don't you just use 2 chains?
Why don't we just use 2 chains? Rich, did you want to? We can use that setup too. Part of it cuts down on cost. I think a lot of it is too with it. And we also want to do the vertical alignment just so they're not, side by side. We like, that seems to work out well for us. And it just, I think cost would be part of it. Is why. Rich, did you have any other? Why did you?
I mean, probably the biggest driver was visual impact.
Yeah.
The anchor you're looking at there is typically what we would use if we're going to install a new anchor completely. The next slide is if we're going
Is that more you're talking about?
if we're going to
Yeah.
use anchors that are already in place that might have webbing or other things on them, that would be the approach that we would use. And then the third setup is more of a sports setup, which we typically don't use in the needles very much, but would give us the flexibility. The goal was to try to minimize the number of parts we needed to have in inventory, and yet adapt to a wide range of anchor configurations that we find both at Rushmore and Custer State Park. So that's how we ended up where we ended up.
Sometimes you get pinnacles in the needles. They're really slender at the top, and there'll be routes coming up both sides. So in some cases, it's good to have chains that you can kind of flip to either end of it, or sometimes it's nice just to use the regular setup that we use. So it's good to have something that would match all the variables that we run into on the field. So this is what we've been going with.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
So in Central Texas, we have 2 major kinds of rock. We've got kind of this soft limestone, which is the bulk of what Central Texas Mountaineers does, and we have enchanted rock, which is granite, and we use very different techniques for the 2 of them. So for granite, recently we've been using, what is it, the triplex bolt, the same one you guys are using there? Because it's easy to take off, pull out, inspect, replace, put back in again, reuse the same bolt if it's in fine shape, or put a different one in the same mold. And in that hard rock, it seems to hold very well and do very well. However, in the limestone, every bolt that we've tried, the triplex or anything from any other manufacturer, I'd love to try your bolt if we haven't tried it yet, but anything that has kind of a nut that screws on, eventually will loosen in our rock, and then the nut starts to come off, and we have to go tighten it, and then a couple months later we have to go tighten it again, and a couple months later we have to go tighten it again, and it gets kind of old, so we just pull them out and we use Powers bolts exclusively for mechanical bolts, and then we use stainless glue ends, and we do glue ends for more wet areas where there's either runoff or seepage in the rock. And we also install sport anchors on a lot of our commonly traveled routes for convenience, and because we've had some injuries where new climbers coming from a gym, cleaning a route, fall off. And the more times that the helicopter has to come out and fly people away, the more it causes us grief with the park rangers, because they don't like dealing with all that, right? It's annoying for them, and it gets in the newspaper, and their wives are like, I saw somebody got injured out of the park today. So it's better for everybody if we have less injuries, so we use more of the sport anchors.
call, I gotta interrupt you just for a second. Can someone move their car? What kind of car is it?
It's a blue Suzuki.
A blue Suzuki. It's critical because Lacey's setting up the party for later, so just a minor detail.
So, yeah, another thing we found is with the mechanical powers bolts that the longer bolt sizes have been very problematic for us. You know, you judge a rock by smashing it with a hammer, essentially, and listening to how it feels and how it sounds, and kind of how it looks visually. You can tell good rock, but you can only tell for kind of the surface in the first few inches. So we've had a number of times when people have installed routes and they've drilled holes, and the rock is good, 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 bad. And you put a longer powered bolt in that, and the cone doesn't tighten down right, and then it becomes a spinner pretty quickly. And we find using the 1/2 inch, when we go with the shorter length, those 1/2 inch don't pull out. They have plenty of pull strength, and we are more consistent in getting them in good rock with that. So we've gone to the shorter mechanical bolts and also glue-ins, although glue-ins are kind of a pain to work with. Yeah. You all have done that.
We'll pass it to Roger.
I pretty much agree with what Greg said. He's my sponsor. He's the one who gives me all the bolts. I work in Yosemite Valley mostly, and Greg works most of the other areas. But I do find myself working all parts of the park. The rock is granite. It's kind of strange in Yosemite. Till you drill bolts, you really don't realize it. A lot of that stuff is just big plates. And eventually it's just going to slide off of there. You hit it and it sounds like a drum. But their plates are a couple foot thick. They do sound kind of strange when you pound on them. But I use the 5-piece bolts that the ASCA provides me, and they seem to work really, really good. I found, especially this year, that torque is pretty important. It's easy to deform the cone on those type of bolts. If you tighten it too tight, you'll find out. Tighten one down tight, take the bolt out, try to put it back in. It won't start. You've deformed that little cone. It's kind of strange. I just realized that this year because I went back to install a bunch of double ring hangers on bolts I placed last year. Because we're on a big campaign in the valley. I don't know if Greg knows about our campaign, but we're trying to make as many anchors as possible, double ring hangers. We're trying to eliminate all the tat from the valley. This year we went into areas and just everywhere you look was these big gobs of tat. And you see the tourists looking up at the gobs of tat. And a lot of big gobs of red tat. Why would anybody use red webbing? I guess there's a reason, but I prefer if I have to leave it, leave gray. The people aren't standing down there looking up going, what's that red stuff up there? Because they can't see what you left hanging. So we've been trying to eliminate all the tat. It's quite expensive. Greg hasn't argued too much. He gave me 150 of those double ring hangers this year at $14 a piece. That's a lot of money. I still got some, but I ain't telling you how many because I don't want to give them back. And that's about it. Just everything Greg said, except I work in the valley pretty predominantly, but I'm going back and join him next year because this year we pretty much ran out of bolts, except on El Cap and the face of Half Dome. And El Cap...
Ran out of bolts to replace.
Yeah, to replace. Now, he's got plenty of bolts.
Roger there has hand drilled around 2,500 bolts for replacement in the
Guess that's it. Can't do better than that.
How can I follow that? In the red, we have sandstone, so it's pretty easy. You don't have different types of rock to deal with. We have Corbett sandstone. It's typically between 50 and probably, I don't know, 150, 200 PSI. So it goes from bullet hard, what we call bullet hard, to sugar. We primarily use, we across the board use Powers bolts, 3 3/4. But they're about 8 years ago we started using the 4.5
and we really liked them, but they're also quite a bit more expensive. We tried to adopt those because we were trying to shift into stainless, because just like you said, the 3 3/4 were not available in stainless. So, but for hands down, if you go clip a bolt in the red, you're clipping either obviously glue-in or 3 3/4 stainless, or 3 3/4 non-stainless powers, and that's also 99% of what all new development's going up with. It's strictly a cost issue, and developers will just buy the cheapest good bolts that we can get. We have to use a 1/2 inch bolt because we tested the 3/8. We also, of course, tested the 1/4 just to have fun with it and break stuff. But the 1/2 inch, we get good surface area. It's simple as that, because we want as much surface area as we can get for the soft rock. All the stuff that we're doing for rebolting is either stainless, which is probably 2 to 5%. Everything else is glue ends, and we're having really, really good success with the glue ends. And of course, the red, is fairly steep. If it's, a lot of our rock is steep, so that's another reason why we very, very rarely do any new development with glue ends, just because it's such a pain in the butt. We'll have to drill a hole to put a mechanical bolt in, or a removable bolt, and then use duct tape and all kinds of really weird techniques to keep the glue inside the hole, so that overnight it doesn't drip out, and then now you're left with a glue end that's hanging halfway out, which I've seen before. So then you got to go there and cut it off, the whole deal. One of the issues we also face is spinners. You're talking about spinners. We put in a new bolt, we get spinners a lot, but it kind of becomes an art where you back it out. You can either take the entire cone out, put it back in, as long as you didn't deform the hole. And usually it is debris that's gotten in the threads. So we've kind of come up with a few techniques to keep debris out of the threads. But that's pretty much it, what you got in the red. And as far as varying rock, we have really, really varied rock. It can be bullet hard. He was talking about 300 feet from, I don't know what 300-foot cliff looks like. I mean, I don't know why you want to get that far off the ground. I don't even like being this tall. I'm really scared of heights. So. But I forgot where I was going with that. Oh yeah. So talk about 300-foot difference. So we'll have a piece of rock, 1 foot square area is bullet hard, and literally the next square foot over is not. And so as developers, we kind of see, we can hit it with a hammer, we can hit it with a drill. You usually just inspect it, because our rock kind of spoils, and you can just kind of tell, like all rock, you can kind of tell. But we're really trying to go into glue ends for as much as possible, and trying to look long term, because in the red it's very pockety, and it's kind of like Swiss cheese, and at some point we're going to run out of places to put the bolt. And even sometimes now you'll find a bolt that's inside of a pocket, or kind of sit back, because that's the only place it can be, and we'll have to run like a 3-link piece of chain over, just so that the veneer is not laying over an edge when you fall on it. And if you see that, I mean, that might be the only place that we can put that bolt, and in those areas we're going to completely take that bolt out and find, put a glue in there. So that's some of the issues that we run into.
Blake?
Yes?
You said just a minute ago that on rebolting, you're either using stainless or glue ends.
Yes.
The way you said that made me think that potentially your glue ends are not
Oh,
stainless.
no, I mean, we either use stainless mechanical
Or stainless glue.
or stainless glue,
Right.
yeah.
Just
And
clarifying.
99% we're using stainless glue ends. We have gotten some donations from that they just give us some stainless bolts, and we'll use those for those. And primarily, the first iteration, especially for Team Suck, the first iteration was to try to do all the anchors, the top anchors, and now we're replacing individual bolts, because typically it's the crux bolt. What we see quite a bit is, and again, it still could be the raw 5-piece. As soon as we get a spinner, even wind or just wear of it, we don't have a problem with the galvanization nearly as much as just debris being between the shaft
and the hanger. And as it spins, and that becomes a spin, it literally just cuts through it. And we've got 24 pictures of stock where that is probably 10% left. And you can look at it from the side. There's one I pulled off of up yonder, one of really, really good 11As at a closed crack now. It was unbelievably scary. It wasn't flush to the rock, so it wasn't perfectly placed, but the hanger had moved away, and it had cut it down. There's 10% of the stock left. I don't know how it could hold body weight. The bolt? The bolt, yeah. And it was primarily because of it just sawing down. And I assume it's because of just the sand and debris getting through it and just wear. I was hanging on a hook, reaching with a 6-inch ratchet. I just got the ratchet on the head, and my hook just shifted, and that popped the head off.
Did that bolt have a permadraw on it?
No. No. It was just the hanger. Just when the hanger becomes spinning. So we see that quite a bit. If we can keep the hanger tight to the wall, we have very few issues.
Most of the bolting I do is in western Colorado, so we're dealing with limestone in a fairly dry environment. I do a couple of things. One is with the Rifle Climbers Coalition, which is replacing old bolts in Rifle Mountain Park, which is a great sport climbing area. It was developed around 1990. So we're replacing bolts that were placed by people like Colin Lance and Kurt Smith. In 1990, 1991, those bolts are all stainless steel hangers and plated steel 5-piece rolls. Most of them are 3/8 by 3.5 inches. Those bolts are 20 years old. And they've been in limestone, so the salt. It's a reasonably dry environment, but those cliffs do seep. So it's kind of a worst case scenario. And we've seen all sorts of things with bolts. We've seen bolts that are pretty badly corroded and bolts that are okay. And it seems like, most of the bolts we take out, it's like, yeah, it's about time to replace that bolt. But in 20 years of action on this rock type, I don't think we've had a single bolt failure under load. So it's kind of good news that people are using plate steel anchors with stainless steel hangers. And at least in western Colorado, after 20 years, they need replacing, but they're not failing.
Didn't Josh Wharton get hurt by a bolt break-in when he was trying to replace him on a root there in Rifle?
No, he was stick clipping up a root to replace it, and it had the ring, the cold shut, welded cold shut anchors.
Oh, okay.
And he thought he clipped his carabiner through the eye, and he clipped his carabiner. It hooked over the top. So when he ate it up, it popped off.
Okay.
So, not good. So most of the bolts that we're replacing now, we're replacing with 1/2 inch by 2 3/4 stainless steel mechanical bolts or glue-ins. There are some issues with both. I think I'm a little concerned about people over-talking, as we talked about earlier with the stainless steel mechanicals. Something that's a little easier to do than it is with a plated steel bolt. So I think that's something that people who are replacing bolts need to be aware of. And the glue-ins, great for plastic roots. A lot of these roots that see glue-ins replaced are almost like works of art. And a lot of discussion goes into where the glue-in should go. It's such a permanent thing that a lot of people have opinions that the bolt should go here or here so they can clip in the right place. So that's an issue that we run into in Rifle. I think our biggest single safety issue in terms of hardware fixed equipment is aluminum carabiners. So we spend a lot of time a lot of the anchors in Rifle have fixed lowering stations, just kind of get to the top of the climb, clip in, go. So we're using steel carabiners and replacing aluminum with steel. The other thing I do is a lot of just new routing off my own bat, which I guess is part of the reason I'm glad to be on this panel. I know Kevin's here, he does a lot of new routing himself. Various other people, Mike, does a lot of new routing, and we're generally using either plated steel 1/2 inch by 2 3/4 where we live power bolts, or we're using stainless 3/8 by 3 inch wedge bolts, which give us a pretty affordable wedge bolt option. And certainly in our limestone, it's usually pretty, if the limestone's good, then the wedge bolt tightens up and it's fine. And if the limestone's a little bit chunky, then we'll place a 1/2 inch power bolt, which I have a little more faith in terms of strength. So yeah, those are the bolts that we're using, and the primary reason for that is pure cost. Everybody would love to place, mechanical stainless steel power bolts and glue-in bolts, but people are putting up a lot of new routes. There's a lot of money involved, and it generally is a very few people that do it, and it simply boils down to cost. So yeah, people are placing 1/2 inch plated steel, and they're placing stainless steel wedge bolts as a cheaper option to a sleeve bolt if they want to use stainless steel.
Well, we're in West Virginia, so we don't really have those sorts of economic issues. We pretty much use all the most expensive shit that we get. We use, pretty much echoing what a lot of people down here use. We use mostly, been using a lot of the bolt products, glue-ins, the 6 mils and the 8 mils, and I've been really happy with those. And the Petzl, what are those called, Chuck? The 12 mil mechanicals, stainless. Yeah, that's what he said. And those have been great. That's pretty much a staple for us. And I think, what are those, 2 3/4, 12 mil?
Yep. Yeah.
So those are the two main fasteners that we're using now. We used other things in the past, and through the learning process and different applications, we don't use some of those anymore. But our biggest problem is mostly our biggest expense, and it's you pay a price for having such good rock, and New River rock is really hard to depth. So it's not like it has a veneer like a lot of other rocks where you have this hard surface. It's really hard to depth, and so we go through drill bits incredibly fast there. Some of the North Carolina stuff, the Moore's Wall rock, that kind of quartzite stuff, and Seneca is the other place that's really tough on drill bits. So you might get six holes out of a bit, and then you start losing diameter on it, and then you're risking. And that's the plus of using the glue-ins, is you don't really have to have those same issues. So, but you still, with some of that stuff, you need to over-drill the hole anyway, because even those will bind with a little bit of loss in diameter. But financing the stuff has been a challenge for sure. But like I said, we're rolling in the dough in West Virginia, so. But a lot of the things we do is very similar to what a lot of these other guys are doing. So.
Doing all power drills? Or?
Oh yeah, I put in my time with a hand drill. I don't have to do that anymore. No, we pretty much have a permit to use power drill, so it's all. It's not a wilderness area. That rape has been pillaged, plundered, raped. The New River Gorge is not like a pristine national park. It's a very different national park. It's been logged, it's been mined, it's everything about it. So, power drills really aren't the problem. And that rock is so hard that drilling with a hand drill is not that good of an option. So.
Pretty full spectrum of practices, and I was just curious out here in the audience, is there one that maybe wasn't represented on this panel? Is there a different piece of hardware y'all might be using in your home rock, or was it roughly kind of covered?
Townside.
Yeah, Townside.
I think the only interesting thing here is that there's some, and I know we've got some European representatives here, but there's some kind of Euro systems where there's only a single point of that you lower or wrap through a single ring. Whereas these are all the American kind of redundant systems here where you have two items to wrap from. And so I must admit, I get a little bit scared when I have to wrap off a single ring, you know. And I know you can get units that way, you know. So I'm interested if people are using those as a standard thing in America.
Pretty much.
You're so strange to go there, it's like all bomber ruins, and you get to this one giant old rusty cowbell thing that's the anchor, and you wrap up it like, why did you bother doing all these bomber gluins on the probols to get up, and the anchor is just this one old rusty big thing.
Well, the Euros are just
You see all the
braver.
Euros go up there, they clip into one beater and they're off the way.
That's right. Okay, well, that's good.
A few classic routes here in Red Rock that have that single wrap ring and third. Crimson has that, doesn't it? Is that single point equalized where it's got two beaners but they come down to a single? I think it does. Anyway, they're around, but I don't like them. I don't use them at all.
That's good.
We've replaced a number of chains or support anchors where that, what you're rappelling off of is setting your anchors through, but it's more into the road, so having a single point of failure would be nothing.
One of the points with redundancy, and our metallurgist could maybe talk to us about this. I have two things to say, that's one, but this is one of them. That a lot of the replacement work I've done in the desert, as opposed to Thailand, well, in Thailand too, I'm in Taiwan. So we've had lightning strikes on the bolts. I've got one stainless steel bolt that I've got a photograph of it, and I may even have it here, but I've got it on my Facebook page and everything. It was hit last year, and you can see that it's melted. The head of the steel is melted, and it just seems like redundancy. Having two things only makes sense, especially when you're dealing with El Capitan, or not so much the red, but places where you could have that element thrown into it too. And it's probably not very likely, and this anchor in particular is fine, it would seem, but our metal people might know something about what happens when 50,000 degrees is hit over
Our crack's gonna blow up because of more lightning strikes and more fixed hardware.
Yeah.
You guys should all be
That's
begging
just
for
like-
copper lightning rods at every crag and copper every crag. You should date them when you put them in.
Number of thunderstorms. The other thing I wanted to say was, talking around the room during the breaks and listening to you guys up there, I don't know if it's come off clear yet with all I've said, but I'm a real big fan of stainless steel. And I keep hearing, well, the cost is too much to do non-stainless. And I recognize that, especially if you put up a lot of roofs, it gets expensive. My statement to that would be, okay, don't put up as many roofs, put up with better stuff. But there's another cost that I don't think, if you haven't seen the speedy degradation, like we had in Thailand, where I have a whole bunch of roofs there that I redid. I mean, I don't know how many, this is where, 5,000 or 7,000, I don't know. The cost is, you lose the rock, and you lose the beauty of getting to a station and it's this clean thing, and instead there's a mess of stuff that's there. And you realize in a shorter amount of time with a place like Thailand that every time you place a substandard material that will break down faster than the others, twice as fast, let's say, even if it's 20 years, well, I've been climbing 35 years, so I'd be on my second generation now with the non-stainless steel stuff in the U.S. Well, you realize if it's a 3-year period, what it'll be like in 75 years for using non-stainless because you see this grouping of them. And so therefore the cost is you are losing the beauty of the rock right there. And I think that it would be better for us as a user group in the long run to be using the material that will last longer so we don't have that problem in the longer run.
It's a maintenance issue and good stewardship of the rock.
Yeah.
One of the challenges we have here is that they love their stud bolts here. They love them. It makes them just happy to use. And a lot of the replacers, up until we started replacing, were using stud bolts in the Calico Hills. And there are anchors, in the Black Corridor especially, which you may or may not have heard that. There's one anchor up there that rock is some of the softest in the park. Believe it, it looks like it's hard, it feels like it's hard when it climbs, but when you start drilling it, it's soft. And there's one anchor up there that had, how many holes did it have? Like 6. Like 6 holes on top of that. 6 holes at the top of one of our sport rods when we went to the place. And to be honest, when we replaced with stainless, we really should go back and pop those and put glue in. That whole area.
And I'm not speaking, when I say that, I'm not speaking as a absolute blanket, because even I, this total advocate of stainless steel, I have to place in my replacement work in the eastern Utah desert, where we have, we way outsoft all you guys.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I have to use strike anchors, because you drill a hole and you know, the sand coming out of the hole on the threads is widening the hole in entrada. So if you don't have something that widens in there, it can't tighten up. Like you can drop a 5-piece in and just pull it out and just drop. I mean, it's comical. So you have to have something that you wet. And there is no stainless steel strike anchor. So I'm not saying this as a blanket for every single type of rock. Certainly really soft rocks, you're going to have to use a softer metal type thing. But I hear consistently, and again, I'm coming back to the fact that one of our leading, let's say, organizations, one of the climbing magazines, actually advocated don't, just because it costs a bunch. And I don't think that when we look at it from the function of cost, we're taking in all of the costs, because we're paying for it in another way, and that's the visual appearance of the place.
When we pay for it as climbers, like
yeah.
When we go to replace it,
we got to do it again.
Someone's got to
do it again in 20 years.
For that $12 that Greg has to spend to get me my stainless bolt to replace it. You know, somebody's got to cough that up. You know, so that's definitely as much as
if you made a rule that if you don't maintain your own route, the organization comes back and rips at your route and you lose the FA, you might change your attitude about it.
There's another couple reasons for that too. Is Blake, you run out of real estate in the honeycomb rock. There's literally no more spots for a good bolt. And then Jason, y'all had the rather forward-looking position that more of a policy thing that, you know, in the future the park might decide that drilling's not allowed anymore, so at least you'll be able to maintain the holes that you need, have the bolts that you need.
Yeah, I should say that ASA, in the first few years, we used some stud bolts, and then pretty rapidly, you know, actually it's after I went to Europe one time, where you have like old, like 4 different types of old bolts with scars next to a good glue in. You're realizing you know, even with stainless stud bolts, stainless wedge bolts, we just shouldn't use them because they're not removable in the future. So all we use now are removable bolts, except for glue for weaving. But we just use 5-piece and fixed tri-blends because those are removable. But we don't use any stud bolts, and we haven't for a lot of time.
Hey, Zach, before we get completely off of this, I'm kind of curious. Nobody's talked about what they're using for anchors at the top of the roots. I'm kind of curious what people are doing. I mean, I know what we're doing, but what's everybody else doing?
What are y'all doing?
So we have, it actually does depend. So we did, CLC did a huge push. So Greg is really the guy when it comes to the canyon work out here. He did way beyond the Call of Duty, but a couple of years ago we went out and started replacing a lot of the sport routes out here. For our sport routes in the canyon and the Calico Hills, we use 2 primary anchor systems. We either use, we'll put in regular hangers with quick links and wrap rings, or double quick links. We don't use double rings because of the sandstone and the abrasion. We want to be able to replace it. If the anchor is on vert or overhanging, we'll do regular hangers, quick link, and mussy hooks. clip
And
on.
what?
Mussy hooks, they're toe hooks.
Toe hooks.
Clip on. And those have been, we were interested to see what the wear point was. We had the caustic out of Cannibal here in Kelk Basin. That was replaced with Mussies in like 04. And if you go up and look at those, they're like 8 years old now and they don't have any wear on them. So we're really happy with how those are going to wear out. And then, you know, an inch of steel to wear through, they're going to last a very, very long time.
But I should say that we started using mussy hooks in Owens River Gorge in like 2000. And Owens River Gorge is widely known as, first of all, it's had a tradition of open and shut anchors, or anchors where you just go up and pass the rope through and go off. And nobody wanted to change that. So the mussy hooks are big toe hooks. Owens has dry climate plus this fine volcanic grit, which gets attracted to your rope via static electricity. And those mussy hooks, 1 inch thick, some of them were worn down by half, halfway worn down within a couple of 3 years. So it's just infamously, aggressive anchor wear there.
Those
Combined
things are a
with an area
disaster
where,
for us.
yeah, combined with an area where there's a tradition of lowering on. So it means you have to do constant anchor maintenance.
And the reason we don't use the toe hooks on the less than vert anchors, we actually tried it. We found out that the scraping action will just dig a big hole underneath the anchor. So we changed that out recently. So.
Is that okay or no?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Fire away.
No worries. Something you said reminded me of this, Greg. It's an issue we have, again, in Thailand that I think maybe some of you have, with rebolting, where you have an anchor, or even a route that's been rebolted and somebody hasn't cleaned off the old hardware, which in some cases might be as easy as just unscrewing and not pulling a hanger and pounding something in or grinding off. But we have anchors where, it's sort of like a grocery store of several generations of bolts, and climbers will get up there and not be real familiar with the area and the problems. They're like, oh, I got this funny looking glue-in thing that's sort of gray and looks weird, or there's this shiny hanger. I'm gonna clip the shiny hanger. So we've taken all this time to, put in pretty expensive, pretty nice titanium glue-ins, and people are up there clipping into the old stainless ones because they're shiny. They gotta be newer. And this is one of the reasons why it's really important for us, not just the aesthetics of a clean route and a clean anchor situation, but getting rid of all the old stuff, because otherwise people use them because they don't know, or they're panicky, or they get up there and maybe they can't see a big difference between them because you rebolted with stainless, 3 years ago, and it's gotten a little funky as well. And so, which one am I going to do? And so, I think that's a pretty important thing. And it sounds like everyone up there has mentioned cleaning off the old hardware. But
Yeah, part of our rules with Greg is the AFCA, so we have to chop it. Although occasionally that rules got bent, we briefly that was double bolted for the better part of a year before Scott and I got to it. We were able to chop it off, but yeah, we have to chop it. And we'll do that by any means necessary.
That's
for sure.
Something great.
Yeah, well, most of the areas that we do work like Yosemite, it's, 99% of the time you're reusing the original bolt, so it's not really an issue. And you go up to an anchor and there's 5 quarter-inch bolts, obviously you're gonna replace 2 and chop the other 3.
Yeah.
And so it's just generally, I'd say cleaning the anchors is it's also an access issue. When tourists notice it, it's like, well, what do climbers leave up on the wall there? And when you put in, stainless stuff, and you can't see it, stainless ring.
With fixed anchors and setting up an anchor, I guess the issue is always between, a steel carabiner or a steel snap gate and a steel locker is a great setup, and that's something that we use in rifle. It's totally easy to replace, takes a few seconds. The only downside of that is, people can steal it.
Do they steal them?
Yeah. People will steal them. Not some, it depends what you climb at, but, and the wrap rings, when you have to replace a whole unit, including the hanger, when it wears out, it's almost a discouragement for people to actually replace something that's worn because it takes a certain amount of effort to do it. I think maybe it's Camp makes a gym beaner, which actually is a steel carabiner. It has a little bar across there that stops people stealing it, but it's super easy if you just have the little key to.
Well, I mean,
to undo
it doesn't fit with the chain. We've tried it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, we have Sunny and Steep. That's our glue in crack here, and there are no quick links at the top of the chain. It's just a pair of glue ins that people just wrap into it because we can't keep quick links on. There's one route that has it at the top of Sunny and Steep proper. The rest of them are just you just thread through the rings.
Because people steal them?
Yeah, just take it.
It's a huge deterrent if you use the blue Loctite, because it's happened in the desert. If you use the red, you can't get it off, but if you use the blue, most people I've found that are stealing, it appears, are stealing by hand unscrewing.
Yeah.
So
then that's what we do. Like we'll red blue Loctite, but yeah, I mean there's tons of anchors out there, and yeah, we'll totally steal carabiners, rings, whatever they can take. We had 2 guys yesterday. I was up in the Oasis, and 2 guys thought it'd be fun, and they thread their rope through a pair of like raw hangers, no rings or anything. And I told them like, don't do that, and they're like, oh, it's fine. So people will do, yeah, absolutely. Definitely got to make sure you keep the deterrent as high as you can. That's one reason we use the tow hooks, is because they're so heavy. Maybe that's why they tend to stick around. It's because like people don't really want to pull a 2-pound hanger off.
How about patching, or you just got a part of the bolt left in there, and you can't get it out, you can't reuse the hole? What do y'all do in that case?
Use the canvas epoxy, it comes in various colors, and that's what we use for the years. If you go back, and I've looked at ones I patched 15 years ago, and still can't.
We'll cut it with a Dremel down close to the rock and then tap it in to the hole. Usually it's wedge bolt that's back out of it when they tighten it. So we'll cut it down flush by the rock, tap it in, and then we use a clear silicone. Then we'll put rock chips in it and then tap it with a hammer so it kind of crushes it, blends in. That seems to work.
Yeah, we make a great effort to try and reuse the whole block now, and it's something we can't get out. We've got instructions and videos and stuff on how to get out 3 hours.
A good idea for your wedge bolts, guys, is if you purposely put a big braking bar on them, over tighten them until they snap. They'll generally pull out about ½ an inch and they snap off flush, and then you can just take a nail set and they easily tap back in, giving you, that ½ inch of space you want for your putty to really get into the hole.
That's the key. We were grinding them for about 6 months, and we figured out and it's easier.
You take less equipment,
snap them right off. It pulls them out. You tap them back in, and you get about that deep a hole to use the patch on, and make sure.
And then your putty sticks in there real good.
It's real nice. It's definitely the way to go.
Our rock's featured enough that for the stuff that we can't get out, if we can just tap it in, fit, just having a hole and not the book if there's holes and putting putty or cement or epoxy or whatever on it would be more notable enough.
What do you do? Oh, well, pretty much, like you said, get a big breaker bar on it, tighten it down until it snaps if you have to remove it for some reason. And then a big punch with duct tape around the handle and just slam it down in the hole. And then patch it with the patch material, like Greg said. You can get really creative. I did some stuff on the Hall of Mirrors because nobody ever climbs there. And if you do climb there, the leader's liable to be an hour on one pitch. I went to the head shop and got some of these little cat-eye marbles. The layers are bored, and looks down and there's an eyeball looking at it. And you can put moss in the hole. Actually, put a little branch in the hole with some dogs on it.
What do you do in the?
That's about the same thing, Brad. We can do sandstone, so it's pretty easy because all of our rock just falls on the ground, so we pick up, scoop the sand, and keep it in our pocket. So same thing, break it with a breaker bar. If we can't reuse the hole or take it out. Putty, if it's deep enough to accept some putty, and then you can put some sand on top of it, blend it. You'll never see it. If it's really thin, we can use clear silicone. Use a lot of clear silicone if for whatever reason we can't get depth to hold the putty. Just a little dab of clear silicone, lick your finger, spread it out, And I've gone back trying to find patchwork that I've done, I can't find it on occasion. And I think I got somebody beat. I just redid one last spring. I did 12 holes at one anchor. It was 6 for each anchor. And you can't see it now, so. Big nice shiny blue edge.
Nice. Definitely. I mean, new routing, quite often I'll find that I bolt a route twice. Like I'll put the bolts in so I can get in to figure out where the route goes. And then I'll have to bolt the whole thing again because it doesn't go where I thought it went on the clump. Clip the bolts from the holes. And certainly with the wedge bolts, I always try and drill them, you know, a quarter of an inch deeper, and then just go back and just, you know, take a little ball and just tap them in. And the wedges actually, if you drill them deep, are a little easier to patch through the sleeves because you do have a little metal back there, you know, so you can put some putty in there. Whereas quite often with the sleeve bolt, you know, when you take the bolt out of the sleeve, you just have this gaping hole that's kind of bottomless, you know. So yeah, using the Instacrete, I've actually taken a piece of rock from the base. You know, sometimes I smear dirt and I even take a piece of rock from the base of the rig. That's a piece of limestone, it's the same color. Take it to Lowe's and said, will you mix me some paint? This color, and they'll look at it and they'll do a little paint mix thing and then just go back to the paintbrush. And you wouldn't even know. I mean, if you know exactly where it is and you're doing the job, you're like, yeah, that's the hole I just patched. You come back 2 days later and fine.
Can you say all tricks or?
Yeah. I mean, breaker bar, you know, like Jim was saying, and then, you know, if you end up with a spinner, I've got a hand grinder. I'll use, you know, a spinner that you can't snap off, and use a battery cordless grinder. You know, chop it off, punch it back. Use that plumber's putty, that stick you can get at a hardware store. That stuff is really good, really good. Moisture, dealing with moisture, conforms real well. Makes you can mess with color a lot, you can match.
On panel or out here, anybody hear anything new they can do to improve their fixed anchor practice and maintenance of bolts? Or any trick here?
Sorry, I just had a question about this breaker bar thing. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I feel like the last half dozen bolts I've used a breaker bar just spin, you know. And then it's like the nut is so wedged on there that I can't remove it to put a hanger on to try pulling it out or some other technique. Plus, when the nut gets welded on there, getting at it with a grinder becomes more difficult.
Spin your bolt counterclockwise whenever they wedge and they spin like that with a wedge bolt. 90% of the time, if you put a pair of vice grips on them and spin the bolt backwards, and I can't explain mechanically why this happens. I found this out on accident, just playing around with removing a lot of bolts. For some reason, it causes the sleeve on the cone to disengage, and you pull the bolt out. And like I said, I have no explanation for why it works. I was just dicking around with the bolt one day, did it, and discovered it by accident. And so I've had good luck with that when like what you're saying, when it becomes a spinner and it jams.
Right.
Get yourself a pair of big vice grips and just go counterclockwise, and the whole bolt will come out. I've had really good luck. I sometimes wish that they would lock up and spin like that because then I can remove the whole bolt easily. So give that a try next time.
All right, I'll do that.
You can weight the hanger too. Flip in a foot loop to the hanger.
Well, usually what I'm doing is I'm unscrewing the nut, pulling the hanger off, screwing the nut back on, and then putting the breaker bar on.
Now leave the hanger on.
Leave the hanger on.
Yeah, we literally just, we'll just pop right on and put the hanger on and all.
Okay.
That way too, you can, just put the hanger on, there's no sense in messing with it.
All right, yeah, my only reasoning there was if something gets screwed up, I'd rather not have the hanger there too, you know?
It happens, and Scott Massey, who was here, there he is. He can speak to a little bit more than me. He's broken off more bolts than I have, but most of the time it's pretty consistent with the breaker bar here. Every once in a while we gotta get the grinder out. Once you get some funky bolt like one of those ring bolts.
They all do different weird things from time to time. 90% of the time they do one thing, then you get a weird bolt that just is a pain in the butt.
Tomorrow we're doing, we got, Scott, what kind of rocks we got? We got some big rocks to drill in.
We got
Playground.
sandstone, limestone, and granite.
Yeah, so we got 3 main rock types. We're gonna get to, maybe we can have someone show you how to do that.
And I'm curious also that somebody mentioned a Dremel. You've had success with those as opposed to an angle grinder, because the angle grinder is kind of like a big tool,
nice
you know.
and small, and we just use a metal cutting wheel for it.
Okay.
Get in behind, like if it doesn't come up. You just make sure you use a carbon fiber wheel so that if your wheel disintegrates on you, that you're not throwing shrapnel all over yourself. It's a good device to do.
We've had great success with Dremels. On Ace, we got, in El Dorado, we have a bunch of these old ring bolts that,
Yeah, like
really hard.
hairstyles and attitudes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're, you can get them out mechanically, but it's really brutal. And so we did hairstyles and attitudes with the Dremel.
Okay.
And we found that it's pretty spectacular amount of sparks. So definitely wear eye protection, and you have to bring a lot of those little wheels because you go through them.
Okay.
And you can get a special attachment where you can just pop them. You don't have to unscrew anything, just pop them on and off. So bring a bunch of batteries and a bunch of fiber wheels if you're doing a lot of work. And you can clip it on your harness, and you can even climb up on a normal climbing day if you knew there was some junk to be.
And they are making some nice lightweight edge grinders now that are, lithium battery powered, that aren't as big and clunky, and they're a little more powerful. You don't go through quite as many wheels, but they do weigh more. So
there's a wilderness option of just bringing a hacksaw blade and duct tape. The duct tape is for the rock, protect the rock with you, and it doesn't take all that long. It's surprisingly fast.
Yeah.
Then again,
you only have to go partway through it, then it'll pound right off.
So just a question, like, it seems like, the Powers is kind of a favorite bolt to use, the 5-piece Powers. And has anyone ever checked just what its kind of industry specification and certification is? I mean, does it have the materials?
We're getting all the torque specs off.
yeah, it's a great 5-volt.
There's big, huge PDFs available, and there's a bunch of different manufacturers. That's been the standard one for many, many years.
And is it ANSI? Is that what, is it an ANSI
I don't know about that
certification?
certification. No, it's not. It's
Not
not CE,
ANSI.
it's not ANSI, it's not UIA.
Does it have does it have kind of,
But it's tested in various strengths of concrete, which you can tell that you're great.
right, but is it certified for construction work or for like overlifting, which would be the equivalent of a,
Pretty much all the bolts used rock climbing would not be certified for safety and construction because they would be using something way, way bigger. Basically.
whereas if you get a bolt from a climbing manufacturer like Fix-A or BP or someone, then that thing has been made to climbing standards. Is that right? I mean,
I don't know.
Should be.
I can answer that. So Climbtech is actually an OEM partner with Powers. And the majority of what Climbtech does is industrial fall protection, lifting equipment, and things of that nature. Most of what we use in our systems are Powers 1-inch and Powers 3/4-inch concrete fasteners. When you certify something like a bolt and a hanger, or excuse me, something like a hanger for climbing, you really are doing it the right way. You need to certify the whole system. So it's not just the hanger, it's the hanger and the bolt. And to get the hanger certified by itself is this whole thing. But the Powers fastener is not CE, it's not UIA, and it's not ANSI. But you can ANSI it, you can CE it as a kit. Does that make sense?
so just say that again.
It's not climbing equipment, so
How do you?
Right. So, well, for something to be, what you're, technically what a hanger is, and a bolt, it's an anchorage connector. The anchor is the rock, right? So a hanger itself isn't really ANSI or CE. just like the bolt is not really ANSI or CE as an anchorage connector. It's the kit, it's the whole system. So, you know, when we designed our hangers, we designed them specifically to work with the Powers fastener, with their engineers. But you don't certify just the bolt. You have to certify everything.
Okay. Now, if you wanted to be sure that you wouldn't get a catastrophic materials failure, say with a power, because say it had been stress relieved or it came from a traceable material batch, you know, that kind of thing. Does Powers have that kind of support?
Sure. They batch test everything that they make. Just every manufacturer will batch test.
Yeah, but if you buy something from a Home Depot, you don't know, it doesn't have that support.
Sure it does. So,
It does?
right, they're batch tested and everything has a, you know, a serial number, or you'll be able to trace it back to when that particular fastener was made.
Doesn't keep the box.
Oh yeah, you have to keep the box. It's not stamped on the hanger or the. But before they go out, they're all batch tested.
Every single kind of fastener.
That Powers makes.
Oh, I see. You're just talking about Powers fasteners.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Hilti. Hilti makes an HSL bolt, and then and Redhead. But yeah, they're typically batch tested, and you have to, because you had irregularities in the steel that you're getting. You have to make sure that the.
One thing we didn't talk about, and I would love to see it adopted as a standard best practice, is camouflaging hangers. Shiny steel hangers, maybe it's just living in Colorado where the sun shines a lot, but a brand new stainless steel hanger, I mean, we want to, I guess, you know, minimize our impact to fly under the radar. I used to live in a little valley, Maynell Creek, and you can see all these cliffs. You can see the Fortress of Solitude from the house I used to live. It's a mile away. And when the sun shines at a certain angle and hits the eye of the hanger, that thing is like a beacon. It's like the star that's going to guide you to adventure. You know, it's absolutely incredible how bright and vivid it is. And I just, for the life of me, don't see why people don't just take some rock-colored spray paint or gray spray paint and then spray paint the hanger.
Yeah, I think we had some folks. You guys camouflage your hangers in Black Hills. Anybody else here do camo?
Well, so, yeah, we get fix-a powder-coated camo hangers, and that's actually required in Red Rocks, can require the Joshua Tree.
When Greg sends me out some of the Petzl hangers, which aren't powder coated, Rust-Oleum makes actually, they have 4 shades, and they're all Red Rocks. They're Red Rock colors. They are literally the 4 colors you see in Red Rock. It's very nice. We make it very easy for us to camo. But we have one notorious route developer out here in Red Rock, and he put up a crag that became very popular as the Ironman crag. And you drive it by between the first and second pullouts in the afternoon. It was like this star field out there, just so bright. And he's finally gone, made a template. He goes back out there and he's sprayed them all and templated them all, which is very nice.
Is that only the first year? After the first year, they're dull.
He uses,
I mean, ours in Yosemite, the guys complained to me, why don't you guys paint them things black or something? You can't find them.
They'll polish,
Our bolts are
they'll
30
polish
feet
sometimes
apart,
the rubbing on.
and you're out there run out and you're searching for the bolt.
No, actually, when we replaced,
Well-known climbers
yeah,
have
we
told me
replaced
that.
Stoner's Highway in the 70s, I got accused of chopping it. And like, because the original bolt was a single 1/4 incher, about 35, 40 feet up. And then people got freaked out on how bad it looked to put a second 1/4 incher in. And then people got freaked out and retreated off the first bolt. So there was like an anchor at the first bolt. Go up there, replace it with a standard stainless hanger. In Yosemite, a standard stainless hanger is invisible. In Tuolumne, it's even worse because every knob shines. And people literally complain that you should be using like black hangers or something that they can spot. Because like, at least when they were a 1/4 inch with leapers, we could find the rusty leapers. Just use the toe glove, look around.
The standard primer, for those who don't know it, you spray it on the hangers and on the, especially on a stainless bolt head because they're extra shiny, at least the power ones are. And if you just spray it on there ahead of time, it is going to get chipped off and whatnot over the first year. But for some reason, it lusters the bolt a slightly different color that just isn't shining anymore.
Yeah, it totally takes the edge off.
It just takes the edge off because it's that edge that gives it the brightness.
Yeah, we lose the camo really quick here at the frame.
And
Yeah.
one other thing for camouflaging is one other thing. You guys, well, somebody mentioned it too. If you just take, when you're doing glue-ins, just take sand or dirt from the base, just a handful of dirt, and take that up and just throw it at the glue-in right after you put the glue-in. Enough of it sticks to it, and it doesn't look exactly like the rock per se, but it looks natural from 15 feet away. And the natural thing seems to be what hides it. So.
One of the same things that I haven't heard us talk about is using hangers or anchors with, if we're using half-inch bolts, using hangers and anchors with a half-inch hole in them. Is that something that everybody were in agreement on there? Because I know, Chris, you and I have had this conversation, and I brought Powers information tech sheets with me, and I spoke with the Powers rep again after you and I spoke on this, and I'm looking at this from Redhead, and if you look at Powers tech sheet, I can go grab it. It says specifically they actually want us to use a hole that's a 1/16 of an inch larger than the fastener we're using, and they want us to use the washer with that as well. So everything that I've read and been told on numerous occasions says we want to be using the appropriate size hole in our hanger or anchor that we're fastening.
Well, on that, you want me to respond to that?
Well, is it
everybody
using a larger hole in the hanger than the bolt they're using?
Well, the issue is with the sleeve bolt, does the sleeve go through the hanger or not, right?
That's the issue, specifically with the Rawl 5-piece. Historically, the first hangers that, were being manufactured had a 10mm 3/8 inch hole. People wanted to use a bolt, the 5-piece, half-inch diameter bolt, so they were taking it apart and reassembling it around the hanger.
And ditching the washer in the process.
Well, some people were ditching the washer, some people were not ditching the washer. Two things happen. It decreases the length of thread that is going into that nose cone. All the testing that's done, is with that length of thread in the nose cone. And it also is decreasing the amount of surface area that the hanger is making contact with, which distributes the load. So being a general contractor and installing bolts for many, many years, that was one of the first things I saw that I was like, this seems like it could be a problem. And at the time it was still Rawl. It was before Powers had purchased Rawl, and so I called him and was communicating with the sales rep, and he said, no, we definitely want you guys, whatever it is, whether it's unistrut or angle iron, whatever's being fastened in any direction, the hole in it needs to be large enough for the entire sleeve to fit through. Don't take these things apart and reassemble them like I showed them we were doing. And so that's when I started making hangers with a larger hole in them, specifically because that's what they told me needed to be done, and it made sense. So that's a topic that I haven't heard us talk about.
Triplexes too, right?
Yes, sir.
So on that subject, Kevin, I use your hangers, and I was using the 5-piece Rawls bolts, and I'm putting them in sandstone, and I wanted to put in a 1/2-inch bolt in sandstone, so I was still using your 3/8 holes in your hangers, and I don't think the 1/2-inch was available yet. And I did notice that, hey, I only have 3 threads of engagement.
Yeah.
And I would take it apart and I'd hammer it in. Well, some of the holes were so tight that, well, I damaged the threads going into the cone. Well, then I had to monkey around and fix it. Well, I finally got down to, well, I'm gonna take that first sleeve and I'm gonna hacksaw off 1/8 of an inch. I'm not taking the washer off.
Yep. You don't
So
wanna take the washer.
I sawed that off, and then I was back to my 5 threads of engagement, and that's how I solved it until you came out with a 1/2 inch.
Yeah.
hole.
You don't want to take the washer off to get, because if you take the washer off,
You know, per the manufacturer, you know, and I called them again because I had a bunch of different sales reps and I've checked every one, you know, they refer to this. First of all, they tell me that they're not supposed to be using them for rock climbing. They don't even want to have.
Yeah.
I called them and said,
Anytime you
hey,
say rock
we're
climbing.
having an event out here, why don't you come out and he'd laugh. That said, he refers to, you know, and I'll go get the sheet, or tomorrow I brought the sheet, and we can pass it around and such, and it's on my website, but, I mean, it shows specifically in writing, and, I mean, there's 3 or 4 different places it tells us exactly how we're supposed to be using them. I mean, it's black and white. So that's why when you and I, Chris, you and I were talking on the phone, and you were saying.
That our engineers signed off on it.
Okay, yeah, you were
Anytime any manufacturer makes a claim, anytime any manufacturer says something and puts it on their website, they assume that liability. So if Climatech is going to say you don't need a washer, and if Climatech says that these bolts or these hangers are good with a 1/2 inch Powers bolt, it's serious.
Right.
Because, you know, and I'm not going to say anything, Climatech's not going to say anything that our engineers haven't signed off on. And Gary, you and I had an email exchange.
Yeah, we had that conversation too.
And where we got into the threads of engagement and the issue that causes.
But if you take the washer off, it solves the thread engagement issue.
And
so what is Climatech's position on this, or what?
You do not need a washer.
No.
And a 10 mil hole is good with a 1/2 inch bolt.
So in other words,
Here, I'll
take
show
the
you.
washer off.
You do not need a washer, and this is because of what the purpose of the washer is, specifically for this bolt. A washer distributes the load, and it keeps the bolt head from passing through the hole, or the nut, depending on what it is. Neither of which are an issue when using Climatech's hangers.
Right, because the hole is tight to the underside of the bolt head, yeah.
That is the only reason why Powers has a washer there. Now, I'm not saying that the use of Fix's hangers are inappropriate. Fix makes tremendous products, and I think that, you know, the time and money that you put into developing that is more than appropriate. All I know is, you know, what Climatech has put on our website and what we can advise our users to do is you can ditch the washer. And we do this all the way up to 1 inch. I mean, we sell systems that are 1 inch by, you know, we've had Powers make us custom bolts to 5 foot long. Wow. No washer.
But
Because
isn't
it's a redundant.
Isn't there something about in mechanical engineering theory where that if you need the torquing to achieve the specified strength, then the washer is part of enabling the torque to seat that fitting right.
And that's exactly why we had our engineer sign off on it.
Yeah. And they were happy.
Right, and so anytime a general contractor or anybody in construction decides to make a call where they're altering the product, you better have an engineer sign off on that, because it is a liability issue. So for the size and the type of fastener,
I
that's
would,
just
I
our
would
stance
think
and our
that
position.
if Powers is saying the hole needs to be a 1/16 inch larger, then that's one of the reasons why they're wanting the washer on there.
Well,
And,
also,
and you know, power, go for
the
it.
stainless one, the stainless 1/2 inch bolts actually have an extra spacer that you remove if you're using the 10 millimeter hanger. And,
The blue nylon.
There's that blue nylon sleeve, and there's a little metal, for the 1/2 inch one, there's a little metal, it used to be plastic, sub-sleeve that you remove if you're using it with something smaller.
I've never seen the metal one.
There's a reason why there's that and why it's plastic, and it's the same reason why the fastener manufacturers specify a larger hole. And if your engineers have looked at this and it's different, perhaps you have some engineering data there, but in a lot of references, on a lot of fastener literature, you cannot have the sleeve on that type of an anchor contact the fixture, the hanger. You have a danger of compromising a great amount of your shear strength when you're loading that on, say, a vertical cliff, if the sleeve is touching the back of the hanger. That's a potentially dangerous situation.
That's what the powers, that's what I was told.
And they're giving themselves a little extra leeway and that's where the blue piece of plastic comes in.
No, I'm not talking about the blue compression sleeve, I'm talking about, there's an extra spacer for the half-inch stainless.
Okay.
Stainless.
Oh, that's where the blue plastic thing, I mean, that's why the blue plastic is there.
I mean, it's almost the same thickness.
And that's the concept there.
But these bolts are never gonna fail, you could hang your truck from it, right?
Yeah.
If it's rated at 4,000 pounds, that means it's tested to 16,000 before it fails?
No.
I'm good on that.
Construction bolts are not, don't have a safety factor like that.
On
But the half-inch
these
are,
Yeah, half-inch towers.
Has anybody ever set one up and tried to break one? Your body fails at what, 2,000? That's when your heart hits up in your stomach. That's why you don't find it a static. I think we're kind of getting Chris.
All right.
They don't fail, they pull in proper place.
I'm just a little bit confused. So Chris, you're saying that this, and forgive me for keeping this on subject for a second, because I placed the bolt and I want to know if I did on that. You're saying that with the half-inch stainless Powers 5-piece, that the sleeve does not have to go through the hanger.
I didn't say that at all.
No, opposite.
I said, no. I'm saying that you can use a Climbtech product, you can use a Climbtech hanger with a half-inch Powers bolt without the washer.
Without the washer, but are you saying that it's improper if the sleeve is flush with the rock surface?
Does the sleeve penetrate the hanger or not?
Versus the sleeve penetrating the hanger. Are you saying anything about that?
No.
Are you saying it has to be through there?
No. We're making no claims.
Well, does it,
The bolt goes through the whole system.
Do your hangers accommodate the sleeve?
No.
You get the sleeve through there?
His hangers have a 3/8 or a 10mm hole.
So it's impossible to use your hanger and put the sleeve through there?
You can use them with a 3/8 sleeve, but we're talking about the half-inch.
So you're saying that it's safe to use it with a half-inch, but it's impossible to get the sleeve through there, so therefore it's okay to have the sleeve flush?
You're scaring me, Brady.
What's the size of the hole in the hanger?
He has 25 years of climbing history evidence that this argument is not a major problem.
Good call, Dave. Let's pick up this conversation at dinner, and we'll also have tomorrow too. I'm sorry, I'm gonna shut it down just temporarily. Brady, are you gonna close us out a little bit?
Yeah,
not with that riddle that you just posed. But yeah, Brady's gonna close us out. Oh yeah, and let's give the panel an applause.